At my father's $250 million retirement gala in the Hamptons. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the smell of old, inherited power. I watched from the shadows as Samuel Cole stood beneath a massive crystal chandelier, raising a glass of vintage champagne that cost more than my first car. He was beaming, finally ready to crown his golden boy. With a smug grin, he announced to the room full of elites that my brother, Dustin, would inherit everything: the global logistics empire, this sprawling estate, and the private jet that had always been the crown jewel of our family's wealth. The crowd erupted into applause, a sea of black ties and silk gowns cheering for a coronation I was never a part of. Then, the room went cold as Samuel turned his gaze toward me. His voice didn't just drop, it sharpened into a razor. He said, "Vanessa, you were a biological accident. Looking at you tonight, I truly wish you had died at birth." The room didn't fall into a shocked silence. Instead, it roared with laughter. Mocking, cruel laughter that echoed off the marble walls, while my mother, Kimberly, simply stared into her wine glass, her silence as cold as the ice in my father's heart. Have you ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own home? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I didn't cry when the laughter hit me. I didn't ask why he hated me so much. In that room full of predators in silk, I realized that my family's love was a subscription service I had never signed up for. And I was finally canceling the payment. As the mocking roar continued, I simply reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, while my brother Dustin basked in the glow of a stolen throne. My fingers moved with the precision of the forensic auditor I had become. With 3 silent taps, I initiated a remote server freeze on every logistics patent the company used to operate patents that were legally registered in my name alone. I watched from the corner of my eye as my father's phone buzzed in his pocket with an emergency alert. He didn't know it yet, but the empire he just handed away was already turning into a ghost ship. My name is Vanessa, and I'm 31 years old. For a decade, I was the invisible success story. My family spent years normalizing my presence as a burden, while they groomed Dustin to be the next Titan. They saw me reading and assumed I was soft. They saw me auditing and assumed I was small. They didn't realize that while they were out spending millions on masquerades, I was a hunter in the tall grass, waiting for the exact moment they exposed their jugular. For a long time, I lived in an invisible chain, a mental house of mirrors, where my mother Kimberly convinced me that my $15 million education trust fund was gone because of my own extravagance. I believed the lie until I started following the paper trail. 3 years of silence, 2 hidden degrees, and thousands of hours spent in the digital archives of their own company led me to a truth they never expected. I didn't just find the missing money, I found the cracks in their foundation. I spent years auditing their dysfunction while they treated me like an unpaid file clerk. They thought my silence was submission, but it was actually an audit. In this family, if you weren't loud, you didn't exist. Dustin was the crown jewel, rewarded with sports cars and praise for every mediocre achievement, while I was named a biological accident for daring to exist outside their narrative. My mother's silence at that gala table wasn't just fear, it was an investment in her own comfort. She had long ago traded her daughter for a seat at Samuel's table, but the audit was complete. I knew exactly where the $15 million had gone: straight into Dustin's failed tech ventures and Kimberly's secret high-stakes accounts. As I walked past the mahogany bar toward the exit, I felt a strange sense of clarity. They thought they were crowning a king tonight, but they were actually signing the death warrant of their own legacy. I was done being the spare. From this moment forward, I wasn't just a daughter. I was the person who held the keys to everything they thought they owned. In the hours following the gala, my phone became a digital firing squad of mockery. My brother Dustin sent a series of messages that dripped with the hubris of a man who thought he'd already won the world. Hope you enjoyed the scraps tonight. Sis. One read. Don't worry. I've got a great position for you in the company. I'll hire you as a file clerk, so you can finally be useful for once. My mother. Kimberly. Followed up with a voicemail that was even colder. Berating me for embarrassing the family by leaving the party early and not properly celebrating my brother's success. They felt untouchable. Cocooned in a social echo chamber, where their cruelty was not just accepted, but encouraged. This Hamptons world is a trap of normalizing cruelty. In our circle, power is measured by how effectively you can make someone else feel small. To my father and Dustin, my silence was proof of my total defeat. They mistook my lack of noise for a lack of weapons. They believed the inheritance was legally sealed, unaware that they were standing in the center of a target I had been painting for years. Just as I reached my private office, away from the masquerade, I received a secure file from my Uncle Thomas, the only one who truly knew my grandfather's heart. Inside was the matriarch's ledger, a digital and physical vault of records my late grandmother had kept before her passing. As a forensic auditor, I began cross-referencing her notes with the data I had spent 3 years silently accumulating. The ledger confirmed everything I suspected, and more. It showed exactly how Samuel and Kimberly had manipulated the books to hide the theft of my trust. But it also revealed the morality clause my grandfather had embedded into the original company deed. It was a safety switch designed to protect the Cole legacy from people exactly like my father and brother. If the controlling heir was found guilty of fraud or lack of integrity, the shares would automatically revert to the secondary trustee, me. While they were celebrating in their echo chamber, I was finalizing the audit report that would turn their black and gold masquerade into a courtroom scene. I didn't feel rage anymore. Just a transactional coldness. My family was no longer a unit. They were a liability that needed to be liquidated. I stared at the screen as the final calculations locked into place. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine. I would be the ghost that haunts the empire until there was nothing left for them to inherit but the bills. The next morning, the estate felt heavy with a false sense of victory. I walked into the dining room where the family was having what they called a legacy breakfast. The smell of expensive truffles and freshly brewed coffee couldn't mask the rot in the air. My father was at the head of the table, holding court with the household staff and a few lingering guests, already spinning a narrative that I was unstable and in need of a serious medical intervention for my behavior at the gala. My mother, Kimberly, was nodding along, playing the role of the grieving, worried parent to perfection. Dustin didn't even look up. He was already barking orders into his phone, acting like the logistics empire was his playground. I didn't wait to be invited to sit. I simply stepped into the center of the room and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the mahogany was like a gavel. Samuel didn't even stop mid-sentence. He just sneered at me and said, "Vanessa, we're busy. Take your drama somewhere else. This isn't drama." "Samuel," I said, my voice as cold as the data I was about to reveal. "It's a forensic audit." I opened the folder, revealing the kill shot. I placed 3 documents side by side in front of my mother. "Let's talk about the $15 million education trust fund you told me I spent on my own extravagance." I began. August 14th, 2018. Withdrawal of $5 million. October 3rd, 2019. Withdrawal of $7 million. And the final $3 million on my 25th birthday. Kimberly's hand shook as she reached for her coffee. "We already told you, Vanessa. You were reckless with your money. Except the signatures on these withdrawal forms don't match mine," I said, sliding the forensic report across the table. "They match yours. Kimberly, you forged my signature while I was still a minor to fund Dustin's failed tech ventures and your own offshore accounts. That's not just a family betrayal. That's a federal felony." The spin died instantly. The room went silent. A type of quiet so absolute you could hear the blood rushing in my father's ears. Samuel's face drained of color as he looked at the signature mismatch. He tried to grab the papers, but I pulled them back. I have the matriarch's ledger, I continued, looking directly at my father. And I have 3 years of digital footprints showing exactly how you moved that money to cover the company's operating losses. You didn't just steal from me, you used my inheritance to keep your empire from sinking. Dustin finally looked up. The arrogance gone, replaced by a flicker of raw panic. Kimberly started to cry. Those practiced. Silent tears. But I didn't feel a thing. You spent 20 years telling me I was a mistake, I said, leaning in. But you're the ones who left a paper trail. The dining room felt like a tomb where the inhabitants were only just realizing they were buried alive. My father's hand hovered over the table, trembling. As he stared at the forensic data I'd laid bare, I watched the sweat bead on his forehead, a sight I had never seen in 31 years. For the first time, the Iron General looked like he was made of wet cardboard. Vanessa, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. We can fix this. It's a family matter. No. Samuel, I replied, my voice steady, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It stopped being a family matter the moment you committed federal fraud to prop up your vanity project. I reached into the folder once more and pulled out the definitive weapon, the grandfather's original deed with the morality clause. I let the silence stretch, savoring the way Dustin's breathing had become shallow and frantic. He looked at the documents, then at the shattered remains of a crystal glass on the floor, a fitting metaphor for his future. You should have read the fine print in Grandfather William's founding documents, I said, sliding the highlighted page toward him. Clause 17. Section 4. The Morality Clause. It states that if the controlling heir is found to be involved in criminal fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, or any act that significantly damages the integrity of the Cole legacy, their shares are immediately forfeited. They revert, in full, to the designated secondary trustee. I tapped my name on the bottom of the page. That would be me. The psychological collapse was instantaneous. I watched the illusion of power drain from their faces. For years, they had carried themselves with an aura of untouchable royalty. But now I saw the truth. Their dignity wasn't something they owned. It was something they had been renting with stolen money. Without the bank balance I had just frozen, Samuel was just a bitter old man. And Dustin was nothing more than a failed socialite. Samuel's face went from pale to a terrifying, mottled purple. I built this. You're going to steal my life's work because of some accounting trick? It's not a trick, Samuel. It's an audit. I corrected him coldly. You didn't build an empire. You built a crime scene. And I just spent 3 years processing the evidence. Dustin finally found his voice, though it was shrill and desperate. You can't do this. Vanessa, you don't know how to run a logistics firm. You're just a number cruncher. The board will never accept you. The board has already received my preliminary audit report. Dustin, I said, checking my watch. 10 minutes ago. Actually, along with the freeze on the patents, I own the ones your entire fleet depends on to move a single shipment. If you want to keep the company from going into a total tailspin by noon, you'll step down quietly. Kimberly was sobbing now. A high-pitched, pathetic sound that filled the room. Vanessa, please. Think of the family name. We'll be ruined. Everyone in the Hamptons will know. I looked at her. At the woman who had forged my name to pay for her own comfort. That's the difference between us. Mother, you care about how things look. I care about how they actually are. Your family name was a hollow shell built on my silence. I'm just filling the void with the truth. Samuel slumped back into his chair. his hands covering his face. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of submission they had forced upon me for decades. It was the silence of their absolute destruction. Every piece of data I revealed was another hammer blow to their ego. Another brick removed from the wall of their false security. They were realizing, in excruciating slow motion, that the person they had called a biological accident was now the only thing standing between them and a prison cell. The silence that followed was heavy. The kind that settles in a courtroom right after a guilty verdict. Samuel sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the morality clause as if staring at it long enough would change the words. But ink doesn't negotiate. And neither do I. Get out, Samuel whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Get out of my house. Vanessa, you're fired. Disowned. I want you off my property immediately. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply reached into my bag for the final document. The one I had saved for this exact moment. It was a single sheet of paper, embossed with the company letterhead, the company that now belonged to me. That's another error in your accounting. Samuel, I said, sliding the paper across the mahogany table until it rested directly on top of his trembling hands. This estate isn't your property. You transferred the deed to the company holding corporation 5 years ago to dodge estate taxes. You don't own the roof over your head, the company does. And since I am now the majority shareholder and acting CEO, this is an eviction notice. Dustin stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't kick us out, we live here. You occupied the space. I corrected him, my tone as flat as a dial tone. But you never paid the rent. In fact, according to the ledgers, the company has been paying for your lifestyle, the cars, the staff, the catering for a decade. That ends today. Effective immediately. The board has voted to liquidate non-essential assets to recoup the losses from the fraud investigation. That includes this house. Kimberly let out a choked sob, clutching her pearls as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Vanessa, please. Be reasonable. We're your parents. You can't just throw us onto the street. Think about what people will say. I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. For years, she had been the architect of my isolation, polishing the family image while rot ate away the foundation. I am being reasonable. Mother, I'm giving you exactly what you gave me, nothing. You cared about reputation when you spent my trust fund. You cared about image when you let them mock me at the gala. Now, you can explain to your friends why the locks are being changed. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Seconds later, the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. The head of private security, a man named Miller, who had worked for my father for 20 years, stepped inside. Behind him were 2 uniformed officers. Miller, Samuel barked, trying to summon the ghost of his authority. Escort this woman off the premises. She's trespassing. Miller didn't look at Samuel. He looked at me. He gave a sharp nod. Ms. Cole, we're ready. Thank you. Miller, I said, please escort Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, and Dustin to the gate. They are no longer authorized personnel. If they attempt to remove any assets from the property, jewelry, art, or electronics, you are to treat it as theft. Samuel's face turned a shade of gray I'd never seen before. Miller? I pay your salary. Actually, Keaches, Miller said, his voice void of sympathy. The company pays my salary. And Ms. Cole signs the checks now. The transition from titans to trespassers was brutal and swift. Dustin tried to grab a silver vase from the sideboard, perhaps out of instinct or spite. But one of the officers stepped in his path, blocking him with a wall of blue uniform. My brother, The golden boy, who had been promised a kingdom, shrank back. Looking like a frightened child, Kimberly was wailing now. A high, thin sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She reached for me, her hands grasping at the air. We're family. You can't do this to family. I'm not doing this to family, I said, turning my back on them. I'm evicting liabilities. I walked to the window and watched as Miller and his team escorted them out. Samuel stumbled, his legs failing him. And for a second, he looked back at the house, at the empire he thought he built. But he didn't see a legacy. He saw me, standing in the window, watching him fall. They were led into a waiting town car. Not their own, but a hired service I had arranged to take them to a motel in the city. The gates closed behind them with a final, metallic clang. The house was silent. The staff had cleared out. The noise, the insults, the constant pressure to be invisible, it was all gone. I stood alone in the center of the room, listening to the quiet. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like the first deep breath I had taken in 31 years. I walked through the hallways of the estate, my footsteps echoing against the marble floors. For 31 years, this house had been a museum of my inadequacy. A place where every room was curated to remind me that I didn't belong. But now, in the silence that followed the eviction, the house felt different. It wasn't imposing anymore. It was just a building with good bones, expensive art, and a lot of empty space that finally belonged to someone who appreciated the quiet. I stopped in the foyer, looking down at the shattered remains of the crystal vase Dustin had tried to steal. It lay in 1,000 glittering shards, a perfect mosaic of the Cole dynasty's collapse. I didn't call the staff to clean it up. I knelt down and picked up a piece, turning it over in my hand. It was sharp, dangerous, and beautiful, just like the truth. In the weeks that followed, the dust didn't just settle, it was reorganized. As the acting CEO, I didn't burn the company down. I audited it. I fired the sycophants my father had kept on payroll for their loyalty rather than their skill. I restructured the board. I promoted the quiet workers, the ones who, like me, had been keeping the lights on while the titans took the credit. The stock price didn't tank. It stabilized. It turns out, the market values integrity more than it values a loud man in a bespoke suit. But the logistics empire was just business. The real work, the work that actually mattered, happened with the assets I had recovered from my mother's fraud. I took the $15 million, plus interest. And I didn't buy a yacht or throw a masquerade. I established the Ledger Foundation. It's a legal defense and scholarship fund specifically designed for victims of familial financial abuse and parental parentification. We provide forensic accountants and lawyers to children who have been used as piggy banks or emotional support animals by narcissistic parents. We help them find their own receipts. We help them get out. Yesterday, I sat in my new office, looking out at the ocean. The water was gray and calm, the exact color of the server room where I had spent years planning my survival. I realized that my revenge wasn't the eviction notice or the public humiliation of my family. Those were just necessary corrections. My revenge was this: I was at peace. I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I wasn't auditing my own behavior to see if I was worthy of love. I was simply existing, fully and loudly, in a world I had built with my own hands. And this brings me to you. I know there is someone listening to this right now who feels like a ghost in their own life. You are the one sitting at the edge of the dinner table, smiling while they make jokes at your expense. You are the one fixing the problems they create, only to be told you're difficult or too sensitive when you ask for basic respect. You are the one they call a burden while they stand on your shoulders to reach the top. I am writing this letter to the outsiders, to the scapegoats, to the biological accidents, They want you to believe that your silence is weakness. They want you to believe that because you aren't shouting. You aren't strong. They are wrong. Your silence is an archive. Your observation is a weapon. While they are busy performing their importance, you are learning the architecture of their lies. You are gathering the data that will one day set you free. Do not let them convince you that you are small just because you don't fit into the box they built for you. You don't fit because you are bigger than the box. You don't belong at their table because you were meant to build your own. It might take years. It took me a decade of grinding in the dark. Of being the useless daughter. Of letting them think they had won. But the truth is, a patient hunter. Keep your receipts. Trust your gut. And remember that the people who try to bury you simply don't realize that you are a seed. They aren't ending your story. They are just providing the dirt you need to grow. Integrity is a quiet thing. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need a gala. It just needs to be true. And when the glass houses of the arrogant finally shatter, integrity is the only thing that will be left standing among the ruins. You are not alone. You are not a mistake. You are simply under audit. And I promise you, the final report is going to be magnificent. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know their worth isn't for rent. See you in the next story.